Hello there. My name is Cameron Stout, and the topic I decided to do my project on is sport and nationalism in mixed martial arts, which brings me to both my hypothesis and research question. And starting out, my hypothesis is that nationalism exists in the sport of MMA from MMA fighters, using the sport to set a platform for exemplifying identification with their own nation with pride while also trying to assert power and control over other nations. What we will look at is how the sport of MMA is being used from specific athletes, which will be Conor McGregor and Colby Covington, Conor at the top picture and Colby the bottom picture. We'll see how they use the sport of MMA to exemplify dominating their opponents and their countries while expressing identification with their own nation through various ways of communication, which lastly brings me to my research question: how do both Colby Covington and Conor McGregor use the sport of MMA to exemplify nationalism? So later on, we will look at various examples of communication to see how these specific fighters use their MMA background and the sport of MMA to exemplify nationalism. But first, we got to discuss the introduction and background information that is relevant to this topic. So starting out, we got to know, what is nationalism? And nationalism is broadly understood as a system of cultural beliefs about the social grouping, the nation, and the sense of identity that emerges among those who feel that they belong to it, which brings us to the term nation. And nation refers to a group of people who feel they share an identity based on citizenship and a common history, language, and symbols. The nation is a relatively recent form of political organization that began in Western Europe and in its colonies in the late 18th century, moving eastward to Greece in the early 19th century, and reached China in the Far East in the early 20th century. The concept of the nation emerged out of European Romanticism of the late 18th century and early 19th centuries, particularly German Romanticism, as epitomized in the philosophy of Johann Gottfried Herder. There was this romantic notion, which was that members of nations shared this kind of inborn primordial sentiment or essential character that made them either French, German, or some other identity, and that a nation should be coterminous with the state that governs it. Romantic nationalism assumes that the nation was a natural grouping of people who had rights to be represented by a sovereign state which rose organically out of their midst. Those who advocated it saw the spread of the nation as an indicator of a civilized world order in which democratic forms of governance replaced other forms of state formation, such as loosely structured empires, absolute monarchies, and theocracies. Nationalism has been influenced by sport talent and excellence development due to the boost of confidence athletes get leading up to competition and after they have won in competition. The needs and requirements of talent development may depend largely, however, on the athlete's stage of development in terms of the athletes being either semi-professionals or professionals. The performance level already achieved by these athletes, along with this existing economic factor, may be a relevant component in their perception of their development of sports talent and excellence. This proves where sport can make nationalism become gendered due to male MMA athletes needing to take on the masculine role of achieving excellence in MMA due to being the breadwinners, while also needing to uphold a position of power in order to show their nation is strong, powerful, and will never give up. They have the idea that their talent they bring to the sport of MMA and their idea of obtaining excellence will help these male MMA athletes achieve power and status towards their nation, since they are engaging in cultural citizenship. They're using their cultural practices and beliefs in order to negotiate opposing and ambivalent relations with the state and the forms of hegemony that construct the principles of belonging within their nation's territory or population. MMA athletes use their sport talent and idea of achieving excellence from constructing their own ideas of hegemony from MMA in order to serve as a positive symbol for their nation, while also asserting power and control over other nations. This brings us to a study that did research on individualistic and national characteristics and the prevalence of sport nationalism in certain countries, determining the extent to which nationalism is apparent in sports. At an individual level, age, religion, income, sport participation, and sport attendance show a positive correlation with sport nationalism versus education having a negative correlation. This effect of age varies between countries, however. More democratic, prosperous, and globalized countries are the least sport nationalistic. When looking at how individual and national factors interact, the individual effect of education depends on the national level of cultural globalization, which is a greater negative effect in more globalized countries, and the individual effect of income depends on gross domestic product. The topic of this study is the prevalence of sport nationalism, how it varies between countries, and how such differences might depend on factors at both individual and national levels. Given the pervasiveness of sports in late modern societies and the many evident links to nationalism, it comes as no surprise that sport-related national identities, being proud when national athletes succeed, are relatively strong and widespread. Although, when at first glance, a high level of sport nationalism makes countries appear more similar than different. There is also strong and systematic differences between countries' sport nationalism. The countries/regions with low levels of sport nationalism are all West European, which consists of Switzerland, Finland, Norway, Flanders, and France, versus most of the Eastern Europe, which consists of Poland, Croatia, Russia, Latvia, and Slovenia, have higher than average values. What this could indicate is that nationalism, as it is found in relation to sports, reflects some type of familiar East-West difference in nationalism. However, there are two precautions to this conclusion. The first one being the Czech Republic, despite being an East European country, is low on sport nationalism, and several Western countries, consisting of Australia, New Zealand, and the United States, are above the world average of sport nationalism. The second precaution is that the East-West nationalism distinction mostly comes with an idea of substantive differences, which is ethnic versus civil, in nationalism. And even though sports could easily be interpreted as a factor related to ethnic nationalism, the data does not contain information on the content of sport nationalism that allows the researchers to draw conclusions on such issues. Furthermore, in numerous cases, it seems that differences in sport nationalism are related to economic and cultural resources, and as has been determined, variations at the national level suggest national differences other than East-West. In general, countries with low GDPs and low levels of democracy and cultural globalization are clearly more sport nationalistic than other countries. This indicates that nationalism as related to sports might play different roles in various countries, pointing beyond the classic East-West distinction and revealing the need for empirical and theoretical refinements. Next, this aim was more complex in the understanding of how sport nationalism is a result of material and cultural factors. For the cultural matters, the hypothesis that were confirmed was that highly educated people everywhere tend to be less sport nationalistic than less educated people. There is this assumption that relation to the interactions between individual and national levels was also supported, which was that education has a stronger negative effect on sport nationalism in culturally globalized countries. For income, the basic assumption of a negative effect was not supported, and high income seems, in general, to further support nationalism. However, the hypothesis of an interaction between the effect of income on the individual level and a country's prosperity, GDP, was supported, which was that the effect of income is negative in more prosperous countries, but positive in poorer countries. The initial general hypothesis was thereby rejected. However, due to the interaction effects, it seems valid in a few wealthy countries. Furthermore, differences at the individual level were found, mostly in line with the hypothesis, to show that older people in general are more sport nationalist than younger people, and also that there are exceptions to this tendency, such that age has a very weak and even opposite effect in some countries. Gender is less important in this picture, whereas attending religious services has a positive correlation to sport nationalism. The assumption that sport nationalism is not only about nationalism, but also the more ordinary, everyday phenomenon of sports is confirmed. As both sport activity and sport attendance further sport nationalism. On the national level, three of the explanatory factors involved had the expected effects. Prosperous countries, culturally globalized countries, and countries with strong democracies are all relatively low in sport nationalism. A country's interest in elite sports, when, as being measured in the study, seems to not matter for sport nationalism. These findings have several implications for the general sociology of nationalism. The first one being, we can see that sport nationalism is present everywhere, even though it is present in different disguises. This points towards the relevance of the example of football as fuel for nationalism in a global age, a common narrative on sports, of which football is only the most visible, is given particular national features. In theoretical terms, sports activates ideas and memories of who we are as citizens of a country. Second, the results indicate that this East-West distinction is operative and useful. However, the results also blur this distinction and point toward other geographical distinctions, being north-south, continent-based, rich-poor, and more or less globalized, which make a difference in sport nationalism. Nationalism can also shape the way fighters look at it and will use it by the skills MMA fighters bring to the octagon, such as Muay Thai experience. Muay Thai is the national sport of Thailand and one of its major cultural exports. These scholars have paid little attention to Muay Thai and its role as national sport, or to the cultural politicking that attends it. As Muay Thai became increasingly popular internationally, conservative proponents of the sport in Thailand are reifying its history while inventing the tradition to ensure that its Thai cultural trappings are not eroded. On the basis of a slim set of historical references, several Thai institutions, which includes government ministries and universities, characterize Muay as an integral part of royalist national history and concretize those characterizations in the form of museums, academic institutionalization, and the registration of Muay Thai as intangible cultural heritage. Central to the cultural politics of Muay is its evocation of Thai nationalism. As the purported fighting art of historical Siamese kings, Muay is imputed to embody what I have previously what the author previously characterized as Thailand national warrior spirit, and consequently playing a pronounced role in the Thai national ethos. This pervasive mythologizing, about Muay in virtually every extant description of it relentlessly evidences this connection. For example, on the website of one of the international governing bodies for amateur Muay Thai, one finds many different versions of the history of Muay Thai existing, but all the sources agree that Muay Thai was the primary and the most effective method of self-defense used by Thai warriors on the battlefields of conflicts, along with the wars that occurred countless times throughout the history of the nation known as Thailand. For its military, it has always had use for the close combat fighting skills. The martial art of the battlefield is what they classified it as. When a Thai soldier fights hand to hand, he uses Muay Thai. But then so does every Thai person, whether it's male or female. Muay Thai is important to the individual's lost where I was at. Muay Thai is important to the Thai individuals, communities, society, and nation, and it has played an important role in maintaining Thailand's independence from the past to the present. In the past, all of these young men, being kings, princes, high-ranking military officers, and commoners alike, were trained in Muay Thai for self-defense along with national defense. It has shaped the way fighters look at it and exemplify nationalism in order to use it for national defense for their countries. By using this skill, they use this skill to sort of secure a win for their country and to dominate other countries. There's this idea that arises I didn't mean to skip ahead. But there's this idea that arises, which is to live is to fight. And it has influenced how MMA fighters use the sport of MMA to exemplify nationalism. So there's this question, why are white supremacist groups forming fight clubs and MMA promotion? And this answer lies in the violent nature of the sport, along with their ability to thrive within it. On April 23rd of 2018, there was approximately 1,000 neo-Nazis and white supremacists descending on Ostritz, a small German town near the Polish border, in order to attend this Shield and Sword far-right festival. And it was held in honor of Adolf Hitler's birthday. The two-day event featured far-right merchandise, heavy metal concerts, political speeches, and tournaments with competitors from some of the most notorious white supremacist groups involved in the fight scene. Among those present were members of the Rise Above movement. The MMA promotion was responsible for the tournament, and this person goes by the name of Kampf der Nibelungen. And he came up with this idea to live is to fight. And what he said was that at all times, it was fighters who defended their clan, their tribe, their homeland. Members of the far right hope to use MMA to pull in young people. And it's a question of fashion. according to Sword and Shield's organizer Thorsten Heise. And what was also said was that we're seeing lots of young people in Europe not interested in drugs, but they're interested in fighting. And they're interested in fighting in the ring with all types of rules. And especially in the nationalist scene, it's the style to be fit, to have a nice body. Everybody loves that, and the MMA fighters all love this as well. And what this proves is how MMA athletes and coaches have tried to manipulate citizenship systems towards their advantage, so that way these athletes can compete at high levels that they are striving towards, while also being able to continue their careers in states where it proves the most difficult to do so at home. This idea of to live is to fight is put forth by these power brokers that engage in transnational wheeling and dealing, which facilitate these moves by these athletes in order to get the most reward for their hard work and talent. And the way these power brokers and MMA push for the idea that MMA fighters, what they push for is that these MMA fighters, they need to fight for their lives. They need to give everything that they got in the octagon, since they're representing their family. They're told they're representing their families, they're representing their nation. And it influences the idea that these athletes need to fight for their nation and dominate over others, even though it is just for profit beneath the surface. Nationalism has led to interstate conflict in international sports through various military and political conflicts around the world. For example, like I have listed there, the football war, Serbian-Albanian drone conflict, and the Nazi Olympics, which I'm going to talk about here in a little bit. Reporters have often described these games, however, in military terminology and compare wins and losses to these past battles. The author explains this idea that only welfare feeds the imagination and cements national identity more than sports. And what scholars, they point to many examples in which nationalism from sporting events sparked conflict between countries. These cases suggest that conflict often occurs as an unintended consequence of sport nationalism. However, there is also to show leaders sometimes exploit international sporting events in order to generate this support for their foreign policy ambitions. So starting out, the football war. Many of these scholars, they blame this war on a series of soccer riots that exacerbated an already tense political situation between El Salvador and Honduras. And in the late 1960s, there was these agricultural workers in Honduras that were facing serious economic problems. In order to deal with this crisis, the Honduran government, they took away land from the Salvadoran immigrants that were living in its country and gave it to Honduran-born peasants. This policy led to skirmishes between Honduran and Salvadoran nationals that promoted a media war between the two countries that further encouraged xenophobia. In this volatile political atmosphere, both Honduras and El Salvador played 3 World Cup qualification games. It was the night before the first game in Honduras that a mob of Honduran fans surrounded the hotel where the Salvadoran players were staying, and they made a bunch of noise as possible in order to prevent them from sleeping. The next day, El Salvador lost 1-0, but the stories of the incident were widely reported throughout El Salvador and incited public outrage. Salvadoran fans retaliated when the Honduran team traveled to El Salvador to play the next game. They threw rocks through windows of the hotel where the Honduran players were staying and used drums and horns in order to keep the team up all night. The mob posed such a threat that the next day in the morning, the Honduran players had to be driven to and from the stadium in armored cars. The Salvadoran army also had to provide security at the game. Outside the stadium, Salvadoran fans assaulted many Hondurans, burned their cars, and in some cases chased them to the border. The Honduran team lost the game 3-0. When news of what happened reached Honduras, it prompted this widespread of violence against Salvadoran nationals that were living in the country, forcing thousands to flee to El Salvador. There was these high tensions that escalated again when the countries played a tie-breaking game 13 days later in Mexico City that required supervision by the Mexican military. That day, the two sides broke diplomatic ties, and El Salvador formally accused the Honduran government of human rights violations for not protecting the Salvadoran nationals that were living in its country at the time. It was less than 3 weeks later that El Salvador invaded Honduras, starting a war that caused about 2,000 casualties. This case provides an excellent illustration of the spiral model of nationalist conflict. Excuse me. Nationalism from games led to violence between citizens and then created a political crisis, and leaders had strong incentives to respond with military force. So the next one, the Serbian-Albanian drone conflict, started out at the Union of European Football Association's Cup qualifying game in Serbia on October 14th of 2014. An Albanian fan flew a small drone into the stadium that was carrying an Albanian flag. When the drone got close to the ground, a Serbian player ripped the flag off, sparking a fight between the two teams. The Serbian fans rushed the field to attack the Albanian players, who were barely able to get back to their locker room. Amid all this action, the event with the goal of increasing public support for his aggressive foreign policy agenda. Therefore, the sporting event was endogenous to politics, and it made it harder to draw conclusions about its effects. Nevertheless, the fact that a leader held a sporting event because he believed that it would make the public more hawkish, along with militaristic, should count as evidence that surges nationalism from sporting events that can make conflict more likely. Lastly, the Nazi Olympics. Following the example of Mussolini, Hitler used the 1936 Nazi Olympics to provoke feelings of Aryan supremacy along with victimization in Germany prior to World War II. Famous author Large describes the game as a crucial part of the Nazi regime's spiritual mobilization in order to win the hearts and minds of the German people. In fact, Hitler did not care about sports until his advisors convinced him that they could increase support for the German war machine. Of course, these scholars are not suggesting that World War II would have not happened without the 1936 Olympics. But however, like the 1934 World Cup, what this illustrates is how a leader with military ambitions can use international sports to generate a surge of nationalism that increases public support for future conflict. Next, there is this idea of nationalist American dominance being exemplified in the UFC, having an influence on how other fighters around the world would think about nationalism, which puts them at a disadvantage. And this started out with famous Brazilian fighter Paulo Filho quoting, "The UFC is a great event, but the Americans do everything so that you cannot get the advantage," he said. They do everything to get you down. American is American. They want to see Americans with the belt, and so eliminate as many Brazilians as possible. 3 of the UFC's 5 champions are foreign-born. 2 of them, Brazilian, in Lotto Machidi's case, Brazilian-Japanese, although it is true that there are these frequent matchups that get created between Portuguese-speaking athletes. And there's also frequently matches between American versus American. If anything, a duel between these 2 non-English speaking fighters guarantees that one will continue to advance in MMA promotion. And they're talking about, if this is not discrimination, the UFC is doing a spectacularly poor job of institutionalizing it. So MMA athletes, they're taking this idea from around the world of American dominance and using it for their own agenda in order to exemplify nationalism in the sport of MMA. Since other MMA athletes around the world see themselves at a disadvantage, they take this idea that the idea of MMA companies favoring Americans and will go out to perform the best to their ability in the octagon and win in order to make a name for their country while dominating others. They will also try to prove how these MMA companies should be internationally driven instead of centering their company around American athletes based off of their performance. South Asian American men explicate nationalism through pickup basketball in order to perform their identities and negotiate the connection their league and tournaments create between race, nation, and masculinity. South Asian American athletes showcase their athletic abilities in ways that have the possibility to reshape the mainstream imagination of the South Asian American body. Through a variety of these skilled basketball maneuvers and with their muscular bodies, they represent themselves as strong, able-bodied, aggressive, respectable, and heterosexual. With each successful execution of a skill set on the court, it allows players within the basketball time to deem each other as manly or make these demands of each of them to perform their considerations of this normative masculinity by manning up. However, these players take it for granted as an act of playing basketball as masculine, and it is contended that the plethora of acts, signs, and gestures that these South Asian American men foreground as by men and for men serve as a part of a larger process to becoming a certain type of racialized national subject. However, some of these young men who act as reshaping racializations in order to enter within the realm of normative belonging, contradictorily, involve participation in ethnically exclusive and bounded sites. Sport is often considered the site for representing and training the proper national subject with regard to race, gender, class, and sexuality. Therefore, the different locations that are diasporic, along with its histories of South Asian American men, meet in this book as playing in ethnically closed circuits, and the experience is not just simply playing the sport. it is part of this larger process of explicating their athletic swagger, through which they negotiate, manage, and challenge their place on the court in these communities and in the national fabric. And this choice to play in the Asian Ballers League serves as this expression of national belonging, along with an expression of the self, which is a stylistic, cool, and athletic self. In this court for the South Asian American men, it becomes a safe space from which they can test out multiple expressions of masculinity, while also facing the ideological and subjective forms, as one of the characters in Thangaraj's article, Mustafa, he implies it as manning up. In the process of developing, along with refining this repertoire of masculine practices, with these young South Asian American men, they manage the gendered regimes of an American belonging. So that brings me to my methods. So what I will do, I plan to look at a variety of Instagram posts and pre-fight, post-fight interviews and press conferences from both Colby Covington and Conor McGregor from mid to late 2000s, when these fighters were the most relevant in MMA. I will examine both of the fighters' language and appearances through these media platforms in order to prove how they use the sport of MMA as a platform to exemplify nationalism. I will look to see how nationalism is apparent in MMA from these fighters, tying in self-recognition through celebratory shouts while seeing how they denigrate others through asserting superiority. Lastly, I will examine how nationalism can shape gender, forming an idea of toxic masculinity, having to be present in order to exemplify toughness and what it means to be a man in their nation from these media platforms. So let us divulge in. So you guys can see there's like this overall pattern with Colby, being the America's champion, putting in their MAGA, Make America Great Again. He's really showing strong nationalism towards his country. He's showing he is proud to be an American, and he truly appreciates the country he's came from. If you guys just look through here, like I said, mega great American winning machine. That's all symbolizing identification with the United States, and being a great American winning machine. That can also imply, dominating other countries, because he is a dominating machine in the sport for America. You guys can see it there again. You can see this pattern again. The language he uses: America's champ, people's champ, MAGA, USA. He's making it apparent that he's exemplifying nationalism, because he's using this nationalist language, this nationalist language, in order to show his identification with the United States, along with identifying with the United States to dominate over other countries. And also you can see, obviously, his appearance. He's wearing a USA shirt. He's got USA flags in the background. He's showing strong allegiance with the United States and no other country. He wants to make it known that he identifies with the United States, and he's fighting for the people of the United States through his appearance, having the flags in the background, that USA shirt I told you, and so forth. And we will continue on. Don't pay attention to these down here. These are just for my benefit. So yeah, it's just for my benefit to tell me where I need to start the video and where I need to end it. All right, we'll do the next one. Sorry, accidentally muted myself. All right, the next one. All right. All right, we will move on. One more clip. All right, move on next to Connor. All right, so with Connor, as you guys can see here, starting out looking at the language, you know, talking about the tricolor flag with pride, having the Irish clover leaf, and we are a power nation, along with having the Ireland flag in the back, really showing this nationalism towards Ireland, because he's talking about Ireland being a fighting, powerful country, while also he can kind of see he's hinting at the fact that his nation is the most powerful and can dominate over others, because since they're a power nation, they can dominate over others, and if they're known to be a fighting nation, then they can use their power to dominate other countries. And Connor wants to exemplify that in the MMA through his MMA performance. Yep. So here's some more evidence. As you can see, representing the green, white, and orange, Republic of Ireland forever, and having at the end on the right there, Irish with the cloverleaf flag, really showing nationalism towards his country, because he's fighting. He's showing that he's fighting for Ireland, and will always fight for Ireland no matter what, in order to make a name for the Irish people. And along with that, we can see, you can see his appearance again. He's wearing the Irish flag in a lot of his posts. He's either wearing it or he has it behind him. So he's really showing that deep identification and love and devotion towards Ireland through his appearance as well, and as I proved, through his language. So we will next look at the interviews. And I will discuss more about the social media posts and the interviews and the press conferences in my analysis. So let's all right, the next one. All right, give me 1 second. Yeah, I'm just skipping around. Obviously, that's what I have listed down there in order to go to the parts where you can see nationalism is the most apparent through these fighters. Um, sorry about that. Looks like we're having technical difficulties. Let me actually exit out here real quick, and we will go to watch the video. Okay. Sorry about the ad. Ignore it. Okay. All right, we'll look at these videos now. Sorry about that. All right. So what we can gather from those Instagram posts and the pieces of clips of the interviews and the press conferences I showed you is that from these media platforms, we can really see how Colby Covington and Conor McGregor hint at using their MMA platform in order to exemplify nationalism while making it apparent in the sport of MMA. Making it apparent in the sport of MMA, excuse me. They make it known they want to identify with their own nation while asserting this idea of dominance over other nations in various ways. You know, the specific language they used in the Instagram posts, interviews, and press conferences. And these hint at the fact of wanting to represent the United States or Ireland while potentially degrading other nations or asserting dominance and power over other nations. So I have some examples in there, you know, what you saw and heard throughout. America's Champ, MAGA, discussing the tricolor flag in numerous ways, you know, the Irish legacy, Chief Tribe of Nigeria with smoke signals, King of Brazil. These are seen, these are seen as celebratory traditions of self-recognition while also demonizing other nations in order to assert power and dominance over others from different nations. And appearances, their appearance throughout social media and the fighters' interviews and press conferences. You know, I talked about wearing the United States flag or Irish flag in their Instagram posts or during the interviews. And, you know, and also Colby Covington's MAGA hat. You know, these are wearing these emblems really show exemplify nationalism and how these fighters are exemplifying nationalism through wearing emblems that represent their country in order to show that they are they are proud to fight for the country that they're from, as we can see. And what we can gather from this is that these fighters, they have their own inventive traditions, which is came about from famous historian Eric Hobsbawm. And what he referred to inventive traditions as they were referred to as certain practices that are repeated in order to implant these certain cultural values along with these norms, while trying to construct this continuity with our historic past. This is often seen as weak, and they're governed by these implicit and explicit rules while also being ritualized and symbolic. They include traditions deliberately invented and constructed by a single initiator who can be identified by an historian, along with those that emerge and become rapidly established in ways that are less traceable, that fall within a datable period. Not only do they identify people under, the nation, but they also try to connect them to this inventive idea of antiquity, which people associate these practices with the past, and also connect themselves with a long line of people who have supposedly engaged in similar practices. Conor McGregor, he exemplifies this idea of antiquity, tracing back to his ancestors that helped establish the idea of the Fighting Irish, since he claims, his clan stood and fought, as you heard, against the English Empire under the regime of King James, where their name was banished for a long time. Conor uses this idea of the Fighting Irish, by tracing it back to his ancestors during the Civil War in order to make it relevant through his MMA platform, exemplifying strong nationalism towards Ireland. Colby Covington, he also exemplifies antiquity from recognizing, our first responders and military, thanking them for their service. He's recognizing the fact that our first responders in the United States, they made it possible for athletes like himself to compete in MMA while also, fighting, while they also fought for the many freedoms we have in the United States today. He's valuing our first responders, tracing back the history of what, these first responders did for the United States, connecting it to where he is now in his MMA career. So, starting off from a comparative perspective, Colby Covington and Conor McGregor they're similar in the fact that they show strong identification with their own nation, explicating language and appearing in ways in which they signify appreciation and identification with their respected countries, while degrading other nations in the process in order to gain power and prestige. Even though they represent, different nations, they are similar from a humanity perspective, due to the fact that they're exemplifying strong identification and love towards their nation, while also exerting power and control over other nations, using their skills they bring to the sport of MMA in order to do so. Reflexivity. From a reflexivity standpoint, Colby Covington and Conor McGregor, they lack in self-awareness for how they appear to fans and others around them due to being influenced by nationalism and having to present it in a way that shows their nation having the most power and prestige in the sport of MMA, not considering, as you can see, not really considering how they appear or come off to others. These fighters, they're creative in the fact that they use their MMA platforms to make a name for their nation, while also asserting power and control over other nations in the sport, using, the different media platforms. They degrade other cultures, and through degrading other cultures, this is a way of manipulating different features of culture in ways that are recognizable, since, these fighters they're trying to make their culture appear better than what it actually is, through degrading other cultures in order to assert power and control. For cultural relativity, from a cultural relativity standpoint, both of these fighters, they lack in this due to, judging cultures, other cultures, from their own standards of what is right and wrong and what is deemed as normal and unusual. As you can see, they have no interest in trying to understand from their own understand cultures, other cultures from their own context. And this is due, to being so invested in their own cultures, where they have to represent them in ways that gives their culture a name in the sport, while also degrading other cultures in order to seek, again, power and control. Not interested in understanding other cultures from their own standpoint. Cool, and the biggest example, right, I was going to refer back to is, Colby Covington. He shows a lack in cultural relativity, as you can see from, he degrading Kamaru Usman's culture from the quote, who did he ever get a call from? The chief leader of Nigeria with smoke signals. This really, it shows that Colby has no interest in understanding Kamaru's culture, but he rather wishes to derail his culture instead, trying to make Colby's own culture appear better than what it actually is, in order to once again assert that power and control over other nations, such as Kamaru's. And Connor also lacks in this, in cultural relativity, because he also does not wish to understand others' cultures, but he rather wishes to assert power and control over them while trying to make a name for the Irish people around the world. And as you saw, the ideas of the Irish have taken over New York City and fake respect out of fear. These, as all these men are known for, they were chased from their land to the edge of cliffs. It shows that he has no interest in understanding other cultures from their own perspective, and instead what he tries to do, he wants to form his own perspective, and he assumes that the Irish culture is better than any other culture around the world. And lastly, we can see from a holism perspective, this specific language Colby Covington and Conor McGregor use in their media platforms exemplifies nationalism as a whole. At the end of the day, their language, it exemplifies nationalism as a whole, since it is used to either express intense love and identification towards their nation, or derail other nations and exert power and control over them. Through these media platforms, we're getting a good overall picture of how these two fighters see nationalism, and how not only these fighters but other fighters, they might use the sport of MMA to also express identification with their own nation while asserting power and control over others. As sports fans and media consumers, we're getting a sense of the MMA being an easy platform for these fighters to express nationalism as a whole. And since they're getting the opportunity to showcase and brag about their skills they bring to the sport, which can be viewed from different media platforms that fighters use in order to do so. It's an easy platform for them. It's an easy access, since they're famous, well known, and they have the opportunity to showcase their talent on a big stage. They can really use that stage, that platform, and the cameras in front of them in order to try and make a name for their nation through their performance. And they can show, or at least they'll try to show, how, so we can see how they'll try to derail other nations through that platform they have. That is all. Thank you guys for watching. or I hope you do watch, and I hope you enjoy it. And yeah, and that's all. Hopefully you enjoy it.